Okay. So starting off with document 42, the David Ramsey one, right? So starting off with the context. What is the source?
The history of the American Revolution.
History of Alright, now what can you tell me about the source? What is the importance of the source? Or like what is its significance?
It was right after the revolution.
And why would that be important?
Well, it was the first like historical account of the revolution.
There you go. Alright, so first. Right, so the first historical account, so it's kind of like, this is the first American history that we're getting, right? This is the first major event that's happened in American history, and this also is separating America from Britain, right? So now that America is getting its own history, they're no longer connected with British history, right? So we're seeing America become a sovereign nation by this account of just a historical reflection of the events of American Revolution, right? So that is important because there may be a question, Professor Ingram may ask a question about like, what is, or it'd be like a document or like a source that accounts the first American history, right? You'd be like, oh, History of the American Revolution by David Ramsey, right? So like, get in that mindset of when you're analyzing the source, make sure it's something around the time. I know last couple of videos we messed up with the source one time, right? Because it was the source from a different time period. So this one is in direct reflection to what we're talking about. So this is one of the sources to like make sure that you know sort of like a little bit of background of. All right, now going to the who, I kind of gave a spoiler, but who wrote this document?
David Ramsey.
David Ramsey. And what can you tell me about David Ramsey?
Loves America.
True. He is sort of pro-America, right? Pro-sovereignty, you could say.
Historian.
Historian, all right.
He's from South Carolina.
South Carolina, all right. SC stands for South Carolina. What else?
Member of Continental Congress.
Member of Continental Congress. Ooh, I should spray this out. Why is that important? Why is him being part of the Continental Congress important?
He was influential to like the masses. Like he had a hierarchy compared to other people.
Okay, so you had status, power, education, wealth, right? Those are some assumptions we can make off that. I'm thinking more in terms of the document itself, not per se him. What gives him being a member the right to fight for sovereignty, right? That's kind of what I'm asking for, if that makes sense. Okay, let me rephrase. So why is sort of this idea of the document, right? So the idea of the document. So first, hold up. First, what is the topic? Let's start there, then I'll go back to my question. What is the topic? Or what is this document about?
Innovations in government.
Yes.
America being its own place instead of
Sovereignty.
Yes.
American sovereignty compared to England sovereignty, British sovereignty.
Get a little too far, you just need sovereignty, right? So what Valeria said. So keep it short, keep it sweet. That's what you want to do for the topic. How many of you know what sovereignty means? I've been writing
Means
this.
being independent, right? Like
Independent in what sense?
Like you're gaining it, or you just about it.
Like self-governing. Like
Yeah, it's more of like individual freedoms, right? So kind of along the basis of liberty, but it's like you control your own liberty now. You control how you are being impacted by government. That is sort of the basis of sovereignty, right? So now going back to this question, right? So why is David Ramsey being in the Continental Congress important to this idea of sovereignty?
Because he's fucking made for like freedoms.
Exactly, right? He sees firsthand what is going on, how he can affect laws, how he can affect sort of individual freedoms or rights, and the amount of power he has being in this Continental Congress, right? They come together, they join to write basically laws that affect everyday people. So does that give him the right to talk about sovereignty when he is the one who is writing about it, right? So that's sort of a good question to have, right? We later can talk about that in the lenses, but sort of have this idea in your head, right? Be like, all right, what is his status with this idea of sovereignty? Why is he writing it? Stuff like that. Having that mindset is good. So if you see a question about sovereignty, you can immediately associate it with David Ramsey, right? You see this idea of liberty or freedoms, right? David Ramsey, David Ramsey, David Ramsey. It's about connecting ideas. It's important for the quiz, and it's important for the midterm as well, because you're going to get a lot of that, especially in the writing part. You're going to have to connect a lot of ideas with primary sources from Voices of Freedom. So having that ability to be like, maybe there's a question about liberty, right? You can bring in, oh, well, David Ramsey was a proponent of that, right? He wrote about sovereignty. He was a man of this, right? So just finding ways to connect is a good idea. All right, when?
1789.
I'm not putting where because where is just America, right? So where is kind of, this is one where you can have a general basis. It's not a specific location. All right. Why is 1789 important?
When the Constitution was ratified.
Right, so later that year after this was written, the Constitution was ratified, right? So this first, it's not the first, but it's the sort of the best outcome they had for a governing body or governing legislation, right? Because they had the Articles of Confederation, but it failed, right? So this is a revised version that gives this America good rights and liberties that they can protect everyone. All right, audience, who is David Ramsey writing to?
I guess anybody who wants to read his poem.
Go a little bit deeper than that, right? So it's just not everybody. What is he doing in this? Is he,
Probably Americans.
Is he bragging? Kind of? Like,
I like that. That's not where I was going, but that's kind of where I was going. So it's like, bragging in what sense, right? So think about it like that, and then who is he bragging to?
everyone that's not in America. Or like the Europe.
So basically anybody who doesn't know about this idea of sovereignty, right? So that's sort of your audience. I would feel like, right, anyone who is unfamiliar with sovereignty, because if you take a look at the document, he is detailing. He's not arguing. He's not going, oh, this is, or he is going like what Brianna was saying. He's bragging like, oh, this is the best system you can have, right? We have individual liberties that you guys don't have. We have this idea to choose our own path, essentially, right? So he's sort of this idea of bragging. So I like that in parentheses. You spell bragging, B-R-A-G.
B-R-A-G-G-I-N-G.
See, that's
Yep.
why I'm not in language arts. Okay. Right, so this idea of bragging, like Brianna mentioned. All right, lenses. What lenses, and for those new here, I don't know if you guys watched the video now, but the idea of a lens is sort of like a categorical topic you can have to relate this document to. So say there's social, there's economical, there's political, there's, we said ethical one time, there's geographical, right? So these historical topics that you can associate the document to, that then what you do with that lens is then like ask questions that then can relate everything to it. So what lenses can we see from this document?
Probably political.
That's the main one I had as well. But in what idea is it political though?
He's a political figure and he's talking about sovereignty.
socially? No way.
I don't know, that's social.
I would say for your idea of sovereignty would be social, because social is more of like, and then the idea of sovereignty is more individual freedoms, right? So it's like you can see like that. Political, the main thing I said is just sort of like freedoms, right? So if you look in towards the end of the document, right, it's talking about how the Constitution allows people to amend it. It allows people to change and it allows that change to happen and occur. So it's different from sort of a monarchy or tyrannical rule, and it's unique in that way he was mentioning. But sort of having that freedom is this new political idea, right? So then this freedom can address sovereignty, right? And then we can talk about, all right, sovereignty, right? We can talk about liberty, we can talk about all these different ideas, but it all starts with this idea of freedoms, but more political freedoms, right? And this is something new because we don't see a lot of political freedoms in other countries. And he was mentioning like, oh, European countries don't have this. Going back to what Brianna said, right? This idea of bragging, right? Talking about the political freedoms. And then for social, as Crystal and Valeria mentioned, right? We have this idea of sovereignty. And going back to the topic, like we said, it's this idea of individual rights, individuals' own way of dictating how they are being governed. And then you can have that because like I include that under social and not political just because it affects everybody socially. Though it's a political concept, it's still affecting the everyday life of the individual, because if you don't have the right to choose how you're dictated, then your life is then, right, it can be either completely restricted or completely free. Like you don't have that choice. It's up to the people ahead. So like that's why I included it there. Okay, argument. Why is this document written? Kind of addressed it a little bit. We kind of went over it.
To keep the historical record in some cases.
If we're talking, yes, you are correct. That is more of why he's like, and the why of like why he is writing this in the first place, right? We're keeping record of it, so that is a good idea for like sort of the source aspect of it, right? So it's something that we're keeping track of, we're keeping record of. We need this. Brianna?
You like saying like governing with sovereignty is the best way to govern?
Yeah, I think I basically put popular sovereignty. How do you know what this? How do you know what popular sovereignty is? Anybody? Okay, so it's popular sovereignty doesn't get coined until the 1850s. During Bleeding Kansas, it was one of the first major battles between Kansas and Missouri. Was like the North against the South, right? The South slaves, and they were like fighting for that territory and stuff. And so like it was a bloody war. And so basically popular sovereignty was like any state that joins the Union, it dictates whether they're a slave state or a free state. So that's where the idea of popular sovereignty comes in. But why I include it in this is because it's still the same idea, right? This new constitution, right, it's basically allowing people to dictate their freedoms, right? Dictating whether it's not in the instance of whether you're a free state or whether you're a slave state, right? But in this instance, it's whether we're going to be dictated as a monarchy or whether we're going to have those individual freedoms, right? That regular sovereignty, right? So that's why I kind of included it. Again, it's a term that's not introduced till later, but still having that idea, and like, again, it's a good way to connect different points in history, right? How can you see one point in history relate to another point in history? And we see that idea was coined in the 1850s. We're talking about 1789, right? A good way as a historian is always keep timelines, because everything is connected in history. There's not one thing that is not connected to another. Find that connection. Everything is interconnectivity, right? Find that connection, you're good. So that's why I kind of wanted to bring that in a little bit so we can talk about that idea. But going back to what Crystal said, I really like that. I didn't think about that. You could also say it is to keep records, right? So I'm going to include this as well. All right, record sheet.
If you want it to be a sentence, I wrote having a record of popular sovereignty in the United States.
Yeah, so just basically combining the two ideas, right? That's a good idea. But again, it's that idea of perspective, right? I mentioned in another video, in the last study session, but it's a good idea to have two different perspectives, right? So we have one perspective on just the political aspect, but then you have it as a historical aspect, right? Think of it in the whole, why is it being written right now? To keep the record, to keep track of America's growth, because it's a brand new country at this point. It's only had its freedoms for what, 11 years, right? 1777, 12 years, right? So it's a fresh way to keep track of everything, records, all that. It's a good idea. All right, any questions? Everybody's good? All right.